Hi guys, Olive here today to share with you the list of my top 10 favorite nonfiction books, at least as things stand right now. 3 years ago, I made a video in which I talked about my top 10 favorite nonfiction books, but as you can imagine, I've read some pretty amazing nonfiction books since then, so the list is looking a little bit different these days. I thought it made sense to sit down and give you the updated list in this video. If you saw the previous list, you'll notice that some books have rightfully retained their place on this new updated list, while others unfortunately got bumped off in favor of books I've loved more since making that list. I still love every single book on that list. It's just that some of them are now in the top 20 as opposed to the top 10. These books are not ranked. There is one book on this list that is typically my answer when anyone asks me, what's your favorite nonfiction book? I get asked that a lot, so it's nice to have an answer for people. But the truth is that I adore all of these books pretty much equally. I would really struggle to put these in any kind of a meaningful order. So let's get to talking about the books. First up is a new addition to this list, 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This is a collection of letters between the sassy New Yorker, Helene Hanff, and a group of people connected to a bookstore in London. Helene wanted to get her hands on a number of works of English literature that she just couldn't find in New York City, so she started corresponding with this bookshop in London, or really one man in particular who always answered her letters. The tone of these letters definitely starts off as more formal and transactional since she's looking to buy books and they're looking to sell them to her. But over time, and it is a number of years that she's corresponding with this group of people, they get less formal, they get friendlier, they get more affectionate. This book is unbelievably charming and so funny. It is absolutely perfect for lovers of books about books, which absolutely includes me, even though the end is heartbreaking. I loved every single moment of this. It's a tiny little book, so I inhaled it all in one day. It's definitely earned its place as a new favorite. The second book on this list is a carryover from the previous list. It's Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman by Robert K. Massey. This is a biography of Russia's longest reigning and arguably most famous female empress, and it's written by who I consider to be among the best, if not the single best, biographer of Russian monarchs. Of all of Massey's books, I love this one and his other biography, Nicholas and Alexandra, the most. They both were on the previous favorites list. But in order to make room for some other books that definitely deserve a spot on this list, I decided to narrow it down to just one, to choose just one of those two. And I decided on this one because I think it is just ever so slightly more impressive than Nicholas and Alexandra. I mean, he paints such a clear portrait of this extremely complex and interesting woman. He shows how she went from being an obscure German princess to Empress of all the Russias. Robert K. Massey does his job and then some in this book, and really all of his books. He will give you all the information that you could ever want to know about this monarch, in this case Catherine the Great, but he turns them into page-turning, engaging stories, so much so that you will almost forget you're reading a biography. You will forget that nonfiction has ever had the reputation of being dry. I was so heartbroken when I found out this author died not too long ago. His work means so much to me. He was just the best of the best. If you are interested in Russian history, you've got to check out some of his stuff. Another newbie on this list is Lab Girl by Hope Jahren. This is a deeply moving memoir written by geochemist slash geobiologist Hope Jahren. In it, she talks about her upbringing in Minnesota. She talks about how she first fell in love with science. Then she moves on to talk about the actual science that she studies, which has a lot to do with trees. And then eventually she talks about opening her own lab and all of the hard work that that requires. Hope Jahren writes so eloquently and with such powerful emotion. She's completely honest about the high points, but also the low points in her life. And the passion that she has for her work just radiates off of the page. I love pretty much everything about this book. I was already starting to fall in love with memoir when I picked this book up, but after I finished this book and after I loved it as much as I did, it tipped me over the edge into having a full-blown love affair with memoir. Another one that held on to its spot from the previous list is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. This was written by a surgeon, and it's all about mortality and issues, medical and otherwise, relating to the ending of one's life. In this book, he talks about nursing homes. He talks about the sometimes very aggressive medical approach to treating critical illnesses, which may or may not be appropriate. He talks about losing his own father. Through his experience as a medical professional, but also just as a human, he gives readers an idea of how you can think about mortality, just in general, your own, that of others, and how we can talk about it so that we can have hard conversations in a gentle, productive way. After I finished this book, I knew I had read something really special. I knew I had read something that was going to stay with me for the rest of my life. I finished this book not that long before making that previous favorites list, and I felt comfortable including it on that list because I knew it was one of those life-changing, we'll never forget it kinds of books. I know that I will be consulting this book for the rest of my life. Anytime an issue dealing with mortality comes up, I know where to turn to. This book has so much good information and it's handled absolutely beautifully. Next is another book that has remained on the list. It is Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. This is a book, of course, all about introverts as opposed to extroverts. At least in the Western world, extroverts are more valued than introverts. It's just a fact. Having qualities of being sociable and outgoing, those are praised, while being reserved and quiet, those are discouraged. But in this book, the author talks about the advantages of being introverted and how society should value introverts just as much as extroverts, just period, but also because there are certain arenas in which we have the advantage. Like a lot of other bookish people, I'm introverted. I love being social, but I definitely need time alone to myself afterward to recharge because it requires energy instead of giving me energy. This book really helped me understand that side of myself and that side of other people who are similarly introverted, and it helped me push against the feeling that I know society has drilled into my head that that's not a positive quality to have, that being introverted is something negative, and it's not. You don't need to be an introvert to get something out of this book, though. She talks about both introverts and extroverts. She compares and contrasts the two, and she also talks about highly sensitive people, not just in terms of emotions necessarily, but in terms of a response to external stimuli. There's lots of fascinating stuff in here that I think about all the time. I apply it to my life. This one has been a longtime favorite, and I don't see it moving anytime soon. The next favorite I would like to talk to you about is another new one for this list, and it is very much the sleeper hit of this list. It's How Music Got Free: The End of an Industry, the Turn of the Century, and the Patient Zero of Piracy by Stephen Witt. I call this one a sleeper hit not because I didn't love it when I first read it, because I did. I loved it right away. But I chose this book as a throwaway selection. I had nothing better to read, so I chose something at random off of my TBR that was available through my library. And now it's on my favorites list. This is a book about the birth of digital music and thus the birth of digital piracy in the early 2000s. It starts off talking about the creation of the MP3 file, how that allowed music to be shared. It also gives the story of one man working at a CD manufacturing plant in North Carolina, how he stole CDs from the plant in order to rip them, meaning turn them into MP3 files and share online. This whole underground scene that he was in, where people would compete to be the first one to rip a new CD. And then he talks about the music industry, what was going on in the music industry at the time, which CDs were being ripped, what was the story behind those, and how did record executives respond when they saw that their product was being stolen. All of that information is transformed into a page-turning, compulsively readable story within this book. I love it so much. I know that's partially because I was coming of age during the period of time that's discussed in this book. I remember a lot of these things happening, so reading this book felt like a behind-the-scenes look, but also the author does just such a spectacular job within this book. If I'm getting this excited talking about it, it definitely deserves its spot on this list. Another holdover from the previous list is The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. Now, on the surface, this may seem like a pretty straightforward science/nature book discussing the octopus. And that's certainly part of it. A good portion of this book is dedicated to giving all of the currently known details about the incredible cognitive and physical abilities of these creatures. But there's so much more to this book than just that. The author talks about her experience meeting different octopuses. It is octopuses, not octopi. She meets them in the wild, but also mainly at the aquarium that she frequents. She talks about meeting other people, other octopus enthusiasts at this aquarium, and how she forms a bond with them. And she talks about all of these encounters and how it made her think about what it means to be a living, conscious being connecting with another. Cy Montgomery adores animals. You can tell when you read this book. She writes in such a touching, heartfelt way. I thought this book was moving. I thought it was breathtaking. It has been a longtime favorite for a reason. Another longtime favorite that kept its spot on the list as well is The Poisoners Handbook by Deborah Bloom. This is such an interesting mixture of different elements that somehow come together to make a perfectly balanced concoction. This book discusses a number of poisons that you very likely have heard of. It goes poison by poison. It first discusses the science of how that poison affects the human body. It talks about a killing in which that specific poison was used and how that case was solved by the burgeoning field of forensic science. And all of those happenings took place in Prohibition-era Jazz-age New York City, so there's an element of what was going on with politics at the time. This is seriously like nonfiction for cozy mystery lovers. All of the information in here is just so fabulously interesting, and the organization is just, chef's kiss. So good. Just not edible. This next book was on my previous list as well, and if pressed, I would say this is probably my favorite nonfiction book of all time. If you know me, you already know what that is. It's H is for Hawk by Helen Macdonald. This is another book that has several different things going on within it at one time. But at its core, it's a grief memoir. Helen Macdonald was extremely close with her father, and he died very suddenly. So after his death, she decided she wanted to throw herself into something. And she decided that something would be acquiring a notoriously difficult bird to train, the goshawk, and try to train it. She had previous experience training hawks, so this didn't come out of nowhere, but it's something that she could pour all of her energy into. Throughout this book, she takes us through that very dark, all-consuming period of time in her life, so it's definitely a memoir in that regard. But it's also partially a biography of the author T.H. White. He had his own experience training a goshawk, and he wrote about it in a book. So part of this book is dedicated to Helen Macdonald responding to and kind of dissecting his experience training the hawk. This book is strange, it is dark, but it is so powerful. I remember not even knowing fully what to think about this book when I first read it. It was unlike anything else I had ever read, and it has stayed with me in an enormous way over the years. It turned me into an unapologetic bird nerd, which explains my stuffed vulture Rupert right there. There's not much more I can say about a book that has meant and continues to mean so much to me, except that it is a singular experience and I think it's magic. And finally, the last book on this favorites list is also the last new addition to this favorites list. It's Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. This is another memoir. It's written by a therapist who decided to start seeing her own therapist after she had a very sudden, very devastating breakup. We see Lori meet with her own patients, we see them learn and grow and have breakthroughs, and we see the same from Lori because she's meeting with her own therapist as well. I expected that this book would be good when I first picked it up, but I did not know it was going to be this good. There is so much wisdom in this book, especially when it comes to navigating life and all of its challenges and gaining insight into ourselves, and it is also so cleverly structured. It's meant to mimic the therapy experience. I actually did a full review of this one in a separate video that I will link for you in the description box below and up in the cards if you're interested in hearing more about it. I can't believe this is the only book on this list that I've given its own review. I've got to change that with favorites going forward. So that was the updated list of my nonfiction favorites. I am sure this list will continue to change over the years since I'm constantly reading new nonfiction books, a lot of which I go on to love. But as of this moment, I think the list is perfect. I'm proud to call each and every one of these books one of my favorites. Of course, if you've read any of these books or if I've convinced you to read any of these books, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below. But if you would prefer to reach out to me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.